Hi guys! Welcome if you're new and welcome back if you're an existing viewer of my YouTube channel. So last video ko, ang ipinakita ko sa inyo, ang changes ng Cebu Pacific na naglabas sila ng mga probinsyang idinagdag ang negative RT-PCR swab result kahit fully vaccinated ka. So for today's video, ang ipapakita ko naman sa inyo yung mga probinsyang nagdagdag ng negative RT-PCR swab result sa travel requirements kahit fully vaccinated ka pa. So sa Airasia to guys, kasi tapos na tayo sa Cebu Pacific. So ang changes naman ng Airasia, ang gagawin natin, nag-change kasi sila ngayong January 2022 ng mga travel requirements since grabe yung paglobo ng mga nag-positive sa COVID-19 sa buong Pilipinas, lalong-lalo na sa Metro Manila. So kung interesado kang malaman kung ano-ano yung mga probinsyang meron na ring negative RT-PCR swab result sa kanilang mga travel requirements kahit fully vaccinated ka pa, so just keep on watching. So first, pag Boracay yung destination mo, ang vaccination certificate or vaccination card, yung first na required nila. Kung wala ka pang vaccination certificate and gusto mong kumuha, meron ako nagawang video and nai-upload ko na yun sa YouTube. Check mo na lang yung description box and ilalagay ko yung link para ma-check mo kung paano kumuha ng vaccination certificate online. And next na requirement nila pag Boracay yung destination mo is negative RT-PCR swab result or saliva test, na kailangan yung saliva test sa Red Cross lang. So, naka-note po yan dito. And then, kung Boracay ka, kailangan mo ng round-trip ticket, confirmed hotel booking, and valid ID, and then online health declaration or registration. So, yun yung requirements pag turista ka and Boracay yung destination mo. Kung returning resident ka naman and Boracay yung destination mo, vaccination certificate or vaccination card lang din, and then RT-PCR swab result or saliva test din, travel itinerary, valid ID, online health declaration or registration, and then LGU coordination or letter of acceptance. Yun yung mga requirements pag returning resident ka ng Boracay. And then kung ROF ka naman or returning overseas Filipino, kung destination mo is Boracay, need mo din ng vaccination card or vaccination certificate, and then RT-PCR swab result or saliva test, meron ding passport or valid ID, travel itinerary, online health declaration or registration, and then LGU coordination or letter of acceptance. Yun po yung mga kailangan yung kunin pag ROF kayo. And then, kung kayo naman ay authorized person outside residence na government kayo, nagtatrabaho, ito po yung kailangan yung requirements. So, vaccination card or vaccination certificate, pili lang kayo. RT-PCR swab result or saliva test, pili lang din kayo. Travel details, valid ID, online health declaration, and then travel order. Yun po yung kailangan yung requirements pag A4 kayo and sa government kayo nagtatrabaho. Pag A4 naman kayo na non-government yung company ninyo, ito po yung requirements nyo. Vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab result or saliva test, and then travel itinerary, valid ID, online health registration or declaration, and then travel order. So, next po na province is Bohol. Ang Bohol po is vaccination card lang. Kahit wala ka ng vaccination certificate, okay lang. Basta meron kang vaccination card. And then, dapat meron kang negative RT-PCR swab test or saliva test. So, pili ka lang. And then, S-pass. Yun po pag turista ka. Kung uuwi ka naman ng Bohol and returning resident ka, kailangan mo ng vaccination card lang din, and then RT-PCR swab result or saliva test, and then valid ID and S-pass. Yun po yung kailangan yung travel requirements pag uuwi kayo ng Bohol na returning resident kayo. And then, kung kayo naman po ay ROF or Returning Overseas Filipino, kailangan yung travel requirements is vaccination card, RT-PCR swab result or saliva test, and then, passport or valid ID and S-pass. So, ayun po, pag ROF kayo. Kung kayo naman po ay A4 ng government, so pag uuwi kayo ng Bohol, kailangan nyo po ng vaccination card, RT-PCR swab result or saliva test, and then valid ID and S-pass. Yun po yung kailangan nyo. And then, kung A4 naman kayo na non-government company, kung uuwi kayo ng Bohol, ito po yung mga kailangan nyong travel requirements, vaccination card, RT-PCR swab result or saliva test, and then S-pass. Next po natin na province is Puerto Princesa. Kung ang destination nyo po ay Puerto Princesa City, kasi iba po yung travel requirements ng Puerto Princesa province bound. So, unahin po natin yung Puerto Princesa City. Kung ikaw ay turista, and sa Puerto Princesa City, yung destination mo, yung kailangan mong travel requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, antigen test, hindi mo na kailangan magpa-swab test na RT-PCR and saliva test, hindi na. Antigen test lang yung required nila pag sa Puerto Princesa City ka. And then, kailangan mo ng round trip ticket and confirmed hotel booking, travel itinerary, approved travel voucher, and stay safe application. So, kailangan mo mag-register sa stay safe. So, kung ikaw naman ay Puerto Princesa province bound, kung ikaw ay turista, ang kailangan mo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, and kailangan mo din ng antigen test, and then confirmed hotel booking, valid ID, and S-pass. Yun yung hinihingi nila pag province bound ka ng Puerto Princesa pag ikaw ay turista. Kung ikaw naman ay returning resident ng Puerto Princesa City, ito po yung requirements ninyo. Vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab result, or antigen test, and then valid ID and S-pass kung ikaw ay sa Puerto Princesa City. Kung ikaw naman ay sa Puerto Princesa province bound, ang kailangan mong requirements ay vaccination certificate or vaccination card, and then RT-PCR swab result, or di kaya saliva test, or pwede ring antigen test. Either sa tatlo, pwede kayong kumuha nun. And then valid ID and S-pass. So, yun po. And then, kung ikaw naman ay returning overseas Filipino or ROF, kung Puerto Princesa City bound ka, ang requirements na kailangan mo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, and then RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, and then passport or valid ID and S-pass. So, yun po. And then, kung ikaw naman ay returning overseas Filipino na Puerto Princesa province bound ka, so, ang kailangan mo is vaccination certificate or vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, and then passport or valid ID and S-pass. Yun lang din po yung kailangan ninyong kunin. Kung ikaw naman po ay A4 na government, ang kailangan mo pong kunin na travel requirements pag Puerto Princesa City bound ka, vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab result or antigen test, and travel itinerary, valid ID, travel order, and S-pass. Kung A4 ka ng government and province bound ka naman, ang travel requirements mo is vaccination certificate or vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test, or saliva test or antigen test, valid ID, travel order, and S-pass. So, yun po yung kailangan nyo pag Puerto Princesa province bound kayo. And then, kung A4 ka naman na non-government, ibig sabihin private company, kung ikaw ay Puerto Princesa City bound, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate. Hindi po sila nanghihingi ng swab test. Kahit saliva or antigen, wala silang hinihingi. Basta, meron ka lang vaccination card or vaccination certificate and then travel order. Kung ikaw naman ay Puerto Princesa, province bound, kailangan mo ng vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab result, or saliva test or antigen test. Pili ka lang. And then, valid ID, travel order, and S-pass. Yun po yung kailangan ninyo. So, next po natin na destination is Cebu City. Kung Cebu City ka, na turista ka, ang kailangan mong travel requirements is vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test, or saliva test, or antigen test. Pili ka lang. And kung ikaw naman ay returning resident, kung Cebu City yung destination mo, ito po yung requirements. Vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test, saliva test or antigen test, pili lang din kayo, and then valid ID. So, yun lang po. And kung kayo naman ay ROF or returning overseas Filipino and Cebu City yung destination mo, ito naman po yung requirements, vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test, saliva test, or antigen test. And then, passport or valid ID. So, yun lang po. And kung kayo naman ay A4 ng government, Cebu City yung destination ninyo, yung kailangan nyo pong travel requirements is vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test, saliva test, or antigen test. Pili lang kayo. Yun lang po. And then, kung kayo naman ay A4 na non-government, ang kailangan nyo po is vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test, saliva test, or antigen test. Pili lang din po kayo. So, next natin is Mandawi City. Pag Mandawi City ka and turista ka, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card or certificate of quarantine completion, RT-PCR swab test, or antigen test, and then, confirmed hotel booking. Yun po pag turista ka ng Mandawi City. Pag ikaw naman ay returning resident ng Mandawi City, kailangan mo ng vaccination card or certificate of quarantine completion, RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, and then valid ID. And kung ikaw naman ay ROF and Mandawi City yung destination mo, ang kailangan mo lang is vaccination card, or quarantine completion, RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, DOH, BOQ certificate, and passport or valid ID. Kung ikaw naman ay A4 ng government, and Mandawi City yung destination mo, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card or certificate of quarantine completion, and then RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, valid ID and certificate of employment. Next, kung A4 ka na non-government and uuwi ka ng Mandawi City, ang kailangan mong travel requirements is vaccination card or certificate of quarantine completion, and then RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, valid ID and certificate of employment. So, yun lang po. Next po nating province is Bacolod. Kung turista ka and gusto mong mag-travel sa Bacolod, ang kailangan mong requirements pag Bacolod City mismo yung pupuntahan mo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate. Pili ka lang. And then, kailangan mong magpa-RT-PCR swab test. And next is valid ID, online health declaration, and S-pass. So, kung ikaw naman ay returning resident ng Bacolod City, ang kailangan mo is vaccination card or certificate of quarantine completion, and then RT-PCR swab test, a valid ID, online health declaration, and S-pass. So, kung ikaw naman ay ROF and uuwi ka ng Bacolod City, ito po yung travel requirements ninyo. Vaccination card or certificate of quarantine completion, and then RT-PCR swab test, valid ID or passport, online health declaration, and S-pass. So, kung ikaw naman ay authorized person outside residence ng government, pag uuwi ka ng Bacolod, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate or certificate of quarantine completion. And next is RT-PCR swab test, kailangan mo. And then, travel order. Kung ikaw naman ay A4 and non-government and uuwi ka ng Bacolod City, kailangan mo ng vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, valid ID, online health declaration, and S-pass. Bacolod, province bound naman. So, ito po yung mga requirements ninyo pag turista ka na uuwi ka ng Bacolod, province bound. Ang travel requirements mo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, and then RT-PCR swab test, and then S-pass. Yun lang po. And then, kung returning resident ka ng Bacolod province, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, and S-pass. So, next, kung returning overseas ka naman, or ROF, and uuwi ka ng Bacolod province, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, and then S-pass. Kung ikaw naman ay government A4 and Bacolod province yung destination mo, ang kailangan mong requirements is valid ID lang and travel order. Yun lang po. And kung ikaw naman ay A4 ng non-government, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, and then S-pass. So, next po natin is Iloilo City. Kung ang destination mo is Iloilo City and tourist ka, ang travel requirements mo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, and then confirmed hotel booking, barangay certificate of residency, valid ID, and S-pass. Kung ikaw naman ay returning resident ng Iloilo City, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, valid ID, certificate of residency, and then S-pass. Next po is, kung ikaw ay ROF and uuwi ka ng Iloilo City, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test, certificate of residency, flight itinerary, passport or valid ID, and then S-pass. Kung ikaw naman ay government A4 and uuwi ka ng Iloilo City, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, round-trip ticket, confirmed hotel booking, barangay certificate of residency, and then travel order, certificate and employment, and S-pass. So, kung ikaw naman ay A4 and non-government ka na uuwi ka ng Iloilo City, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, round-trip ticket, confirmed hotel booking, barangay certificate of residency, travel order, certificate of employment, and S-pass. Next po natin is Iloilo province naman. Kung Iloilo province bound ka naman and turista ka, kailangan mong travel requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, and then S-pass kung turista ka. Next, kung ikaw naman ay returning resident ng Iloilo province, ang kailangan mo is vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, valid ID, and then LGU coordination or letter of acceptance, and then S-pass. So, ayun. Kung ikaw naman ay ROF and uuwi ka ng Iloilo province, ang kailangan mo requirements ay vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, passport or valid ID, LGU coordination or letter of acceptance, and then S-pass. So, kung ikaw ay government A4 and uuwi ka ng Iloilo province, ang kailangan mo requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, travel itinerary, valid ID, online health declaration, travel order, and then S-pass. So, yun po yung requirements pag kayo ay A4 ng government. Kung kayo naman ay A4 ng non-government, ang kailangan yung requirements pag Iloilo province yung destination ninyo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test, travel itinerary, valid ID, LGU coordination or letter of acceptance, travel order, and S-pass. So, next natin na province is Zamboanga. Kung turista ka and gusto mong mag-travel ng Zamboanga, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card. Next is round-trip ticket, confirmed hotel booking, travel itinerary, online health declaration, and then S-pass. And kung ikaw ay returning resident ng Zamboanga, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, valid ID, and the S-pass. Kung ROF ka, gusto mong umuwi ng Zamboanga, ang kailangan mong requirements is vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, passport or valid ID, and then S-pass. Next, kung government A4 ka and uuwi ka ng Zamboanga, ang kailangan mo requirements is vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, valid ID, and S-pass. Next, kung non-government A4 ka naman and uuwi ka ng Zamboanga, ang kailangan mo is vaccination card, RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, valid ID, and S-pass. So, pare-pareho lang sila ng requirements. Next na destination, pag ikaw ay turista ng General Santos or Jensan, kailangan mong travel requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate or certificate of quarantine completion, and then RT-PCR swab test or saliva test, then valid ID. Kung ikaw naman ay returning resident ng General Santos, ang kailangan mong travel requirements is vaccination card, vaccination certificate, or certificate of quarantine completion, pili lang kayo. And then swab test or RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, pili lang din kayo. And then valid ID. And kung kayo naman ay ROF and uuwi kayo ng Jensan, ang kailangan nyo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate or certificate of quarantine completion, and then RT-PCR swab test or saliva test. So, pili lang kayo. And then, passport or valid ID. So, kung kayo naman ay government A4 and uuwi kayo ng General Santos, ang inyo pong travel requirements is vaccination card or vaccination certificate or certificate of quarantine completion, and then RT-PCR swab test or antigen test, pili lang kayo, and then valid ID, travel order, and certificate of employment. So, kung kayo naman ay non-government A4, ang kailangan nyo pag uuwi kayo ng Jensan is vaccination card or vaccination certificate or certificate of quarantine completion, and then RT-PCR swab test or saliva test, and then valid ID. Ayun, next po natin na destination is Kalibo. So, ang Kalibo, walang turista, hindi tumatanggap ng turista. Kung returning resident ka ng Kalibo, ang travel requirements mo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test or saliva test, and then travel itinerary, valid ID, online health declaration, and then LGU coordination or letter of acceptance. Kung ikaw naman ay ROF and uuwi ka ng Kalibo, ang travel requirements mo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test or saliva test, and then passport or valid ID, travel itinerary, online health declaration, and LGU coordination or letter of acceptance. Kung ikaw naman ay government A4 and uuwi ka ng Kalibo, ang travel requirements mo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, and then RT-PCR swab test or saliva test, travel details, valid ID, online health declaration, and then travel order. Kung ikaw naman ay non-government A4 and uuwi ka ng Kalibo, ang travel requirements mo is vaccination card or vaccination certificate, RT-PCR swab test or saliva test, travel itinerary, valid ID, online health declaration, and then travel order. So, ayun po lahat ng updated na travel requirements ng Airasia ngayong January 2022. Hindi pa po sinasabi kung hanggang kailan yung mga dinagdag na RT-PCR swab test or saliva test kahit fully vaccinated ka. So, pantay-pantay na yung vaccinated and unvaccinated na mga travelers. Kung yung mga destination ninyo ay nanghihingi ng RT-PCR swab test, saliva test, or antigen test, wala tayong magagawa kundi mag-comply dahil hindi naman tayo makakasakay kung wala tayong kumpletong travel requirements. So, ayun lang po yung video natin today. Mag-abang-abang lang po kayo sa susunod nating mga video sa mga updated na travel requirements para updated kayo kung meron mang mga bagong travel requirements ang mga airlines. So, ayun, thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Bye! Mwah!